They said the Liu mansion was cold. Not in temperature, but in soul. It was the kind of place that didn't welcome you. It measured you. Every chandelier sparkled, yes, but only just enough to show its price tag, not its warmth. The halls stretched on endlessly, wide and echoing, as if designed not just to impress, but to remind you how small you were in them. And the silence. Oh, the silence was thick, like wallpaper, polished and perfectly pressed, covering every crack of imperfection beneath. Even the air had rules here. You didn't walk, you glided. You didn't speak unless spoken to, and you smiled, but only the kind of smile that didn't reach your eyes. The Liu mansion had a heartbeat, yes, but it beat slowly, controlled, tamed. And I was supposed to blend into that rhythm, fade into its velvet shadows, lower my voice, lower my eyes, and become just another uniformed ghost in the background, like all the other maids and butlers who moved quietly enough to be mistaken for furniture. But I was never good at being quiet. I wasn't raised to bow unless it was to the rain. I wasn't taught that laughter should be kept behind closed doors. I laughed too loud. I tripped over expensive rugs. I sang while sweeping the garden paths and forgot to look down when powerful men walked by. And maybe the worst part? I didn't know how to be afraid of someone just because his last name could buy an entire city. Especially not Liu Chen. They warned me about him, of course. The air. The storm and its tailored suit. The man who rarely spoke, and when he did, it was only to cut, never to comfort. His silence wasn't emptiness. It was power. A pressure that filled a room even when he didn't look up from his phone. They said he could make a person disappear with a single call. But the first time I saw him walk past me in the corridor, shoulders squared, gaze cool, his scent trailing like sharp cedar and cold steel, I didn't see a monster. I saw a cage made of glass, polished, immaculate, and lonely. And I wondered what it would take to shatter it. Not because I wanted to fix him, not because I believed in fairy tales, but because something about the way he moved, like even his breathing had been rehearsed, made me ache in a place I didn't know existed. That's how it started. Not with a glance, not with a forbidden touch, but with a quiet rebellion in my chest. A vow I never said aloud. I will not shrink for this house. Not for its rules, not for its cold, and certainly not for Liu Chen. Because I wasn't here to belong. I was here to live. The first time I spoke back. I hadn't meant to walk in on the meeting. I was just there to refill the tea set, nothing more. But the moment I stepped into the Liu family's grand dining hall, I knew something was wrong. The air was too still, the silence too heavy. It wasn't the quiet of elegance, it was the quiet of a decision being carved in stone. Like walking into a storm that hadn't struck yet. The table stretched across the room like a throne from a kingdom I didn't belong to. Long, glossy, and flanked by people who hadn't smiled in decades. The Liu elders sat on one side, dressed in traditional silk robes that whispered of old money and older rules. They weren't having tea. They were performing a ritual. And at the other side of the table sat her, Lin Xiaohui. If grace could be manufactured, she was its prototype. Every inch of her screamed legacy. Her posture, her skin, her soft, expensive perfume that smelled like imported roses and ambition. She had the kind of beauty that made you feel like you should apologize just for standing too close to her. Like being near her might wrinkle her perfect existence. But beneath all that elegance,
She had the eyes of a snake behind glass, watching, calculating, waiting for someone to make a misstep. And I was already a misstep just by breathing in the same room. She wasn't just a guest. She was his. The woman chosen by the Liu family. Hand-picked, pre-approved. The future Mrs. Liu, a business deal dressed as a marriage proposal. Lin Xiaohui had been betrothed to Liu Shichen since they were children. Everyone in the mansion knew it. The staff whispered it like a warning. The elders spoke of it like prophecy. She wasn't here to visit. She was here to claim what she believed was already hers. And there, at the head of the table, between tradition and expectation, sat the man himself, Liu Shichen. I had seen him before, in the halls, on the stairs, passing through shadows like he belonged to them. But nothing prepared me for the way he looked when he was seated like this. Still, commanding, quiet, in the way a storm cloud is quiet before it bursts. He wore a charcoal gray suit today, pressed so perfectly it could slice you. His fingers rested calmly on the table, the barest hint of a luxury watch peeking beneath his sleeve, like even time was something he owned. And his expression, blank, icy, distant. His face was so expressionless, it almost felt cruel. Like the world didn't affect him. Like he could build empires and break them with that same calm gaze. I stepped forward cautiously, holding the silver tray of tea with both hands. Don't drop it. Don't shake. Don't speak. I made it 2 steps into the room when his voice cut through the air. You're interrupting. He didn't even look at me. 3 words. Low, dismissive, sharp enough to slice skin without leaving a visible wound. My breath caught. Something in me tensed. My fingers, my spine, my pride. He didn't speak to me like a person. He spoke to me like a nuisance, like an unwanted breeze that had dared to touch his temple. Every eye in the room turned to me. Lin Xiaohui didn't hide her smile this time. It curled at the corner of her lips, elegant and poisonous, like she had been waiting for this moment to see me reminded of where I stood, or rather, where I didn't stand. I should have bowed. I should have apologized and backed out slowly like smoke, but I didn't. Something in my chest burned hotter than my fear. Maybe it was the way Xiaohui looked at me like I wasn't even a girl, just a pair of dirty shoes. Maybe it was the way the Liu elders turned their eyes away like I was furniture that made a sound. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the way Liu Shichen spoke to me as if he couldn't even be bothered to see me. My voice came out before I had time to stop it. I wasn't speaking to you. The silence snapped. It didn't just fall over the room, it shattered. Xiaohui's eyes widened, just slightly, just enough to betray her composure. The butler standing by the door inhaled sharply, eyes screaming, "You've ruined your life." One of the maids near the far wall choked on her breath. And Liu Shichen finally looked up. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I understood what people meant when they said a gaze could strip you bare. His stare was frost and fire, cold, but so penetrating it left heat behind. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. He just looked at me. Really looked, like he was trying to figure out what I was made of. Porcelain? Wood? Steel? I should have flinched. I should have shrunk. But I held his gaze. Then, he smirked. It was small, lazy, barely a tilt of his lips, but it was there. And it didn't feel mocking. It felt intrigued. My heart was a runaway drum in my chest. I set the tray down with trembling hands, my breath caught between terror and something far more dangerous, defiance. I turned, bowed, and left the room, my face burning. But as I stepped out into the cold corridor beyond the door, one thought clung to me like a thread I wasn't supposed to pull. He noticed me, and he smiled. And somewhere deep inside me, something whispered, "This man is not made of stone." Not completely. He started watching me differently. It didn't happen all at once. There was no thunderclap, no dramatic confession, no shift I could point to and say, "There, that was the moment everything changed." But something was changing. Slowly, quietly, dangerously. At first, it was just a flicker. I felt it when I dusted the hallway outside his office, the one with the cold marble floor and gold-trimmed door no one else dared to pause near.
I'd be bent over, wiping a delicate sculpture or sweeping behind the velvet curtains, and I'd feel it. His gaze. It would land on me like snowfall, silent, weightless, and yet impossibly heavy. I wouldn't see him right away, but I'd know he was there, standing behind the glass of his office door, watching, thinking, measuring something I couldn't name. Other times he'd pass me in the corridor, just a blur of black suit and expensive cologne, but his eyes would catch mine for a fraction of a second, longer than politeness allowed, shorter than indulgence. It wasn't curiosity, it wasn't warmth, it was awareness. He didn't speak. He never did. But silence from Lucy Chen was more powerful than most men's entire vocabulary. His silence lingered. It unsettled me, and it changed how I moved. I found myself adjusting my uniform more carefully, checking my reflection in the kitchen window before carrying out the wine tray, holding my breath when I passed his study, even if the door was closed. I hated that I noticed. I hated that I wanted him to notice too. It happened one afternoon, just before the rain came. The mansion was unusually quiet. No guests, no meetings, only the distant sound of soft classical piano drifting from the west wing. I had been tasked with reorganizing the storage room off the east corridor. It was a forgotten hallway, barely used except for staff. The kind of place where chandeliers were dimmer and the marble less polished, like the house had grown tired. My arms were full, fresh linens, newly laundered and still warmed. I rounded the corner quickly, trying to finish before the storm hit, when I slammed into something solid. No. Someone. My breath caught. A wall of black fabric, sharp shoulders, a presence that sucked the air from the corridor. Lucy Chen. He hadn't made a sound. Of course he hadn't. He never did. He stood tall, hands in the pockets of his tailored slacks, gaze unreadable. His eyes swept over me like a scanner, pausing at the scattered sheets now dotting the marble like broken clouds. "I'm sorry," I said quickly, stepping back. "I didn't see, you weren't." He didn't respond. He just looked down at me. Not with anger, not with sympathy, with calculation. Like I was a puzzle that didn't fit, and he couldn't decide whether to force it or throw it away. I bent to gather the sheets, but my hands were shaking. He didn't move. "You work in the laundry wing now." His voice was smooth, but dry, like silk draped over ice. I nodded. "Just for today. I help wherever they need extra. You're always everywhere." "Excuse me?" His eyes didn't waver. "You're in the garden when I walk, at the stairs when I come down, in the hall when I return." He said it like an accusation. I flinched. I don't mean to be. I don't follow you, if that's what you're thinking." "I didn't say you did." He took a step closer. Not much, but just enough to tilt the balance of power in the hallway.
I stepped back automatically, an instinct, a warning. My back hit the wall. The corridor felt smaller now, too quiet, too intimate. The scent of him, clean cedar, winter air, and something darker, wrapped around me like a challenge. "I'll move," I said quickly, barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Why don't you ever lower your eyes?" he asked. My breath caught again. "What?" he said. "Other staff do. They disappear. They bow. They keep their distance. I do too," I said, gripping the linens tighter. "No, you don't," he said softly. He didn't sound angry. He sounded intrigued, as if that was the problem, as if I was the problem. I tried to sidestep him, clutching the sheets like a barrier between us, but he moved too, effortlessly, blocking me again, not touching, not threatening, just there. "You shouldn't be this careless," he said finally. "Someone might mistake your confidence for something else." My cheeks flamed. "And what do you mistake it for?" He didn't answer. He just stared at me like I'd asked a question no one had dared to before. A beat passed. 2. Then he stepped back, barely an inch, enough for the air to return to my lungs. His voice came low, detached. "Clean up your mess." He turned and walked away, slow and quiet, like I hadn't just crashed into his world and rattled something loose. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the spot where he had been. The linens were still scattered, but it wasn't the mess on the floor I was worried about. It was the one inside me.
There was a storm that night, not just in the sky, but in the mansion, in the tension, in the air that hung heavy with something waiting to break. Outside, rain slammed against the windows like 1,000 tiny fists. The trees swayed wildly in the wind, their shadows flickering across the grand walls like ghosts trying to get in. Inside, the chandeliers glowed like frozen stars, untouched by the storm. The world within the Lu mansion remained pristine on the surface. I carried a lacquered tray down the corridor, careful not to spill the ginseng tea. The cup rattled slightly in its saucer as thunder cracked in the distance. The elders were gathered in the reception parlor again, and tonight she was with them, Lin Xiaohui. Her voice reached me before I turned the corner, sweet, airy, coated in artificial sugar, like the kind that sticks to your throat and makes it hard to breathe. "Shi Chen, why don't we finally set a date? Our families are ready. We could announce it at the autumn banquet. It would be so elegant." I paused just outside the threshold. She was seated near the fire, her legs crossed, a silk shawl draped perfectly across her shoulders. Her lipstick matched her nails, red, expensive, precise. The kind of woman who never slipped, never cracked, never left a mirror without liking what she saw. Across from her, Lu Shichen sat quietly, his back straight, a glass of untouched wine in his hand. He didn't respond, but he didn't need to. His silence was its own language. I took a breath and stepped into the room, head bowed, tray steady. I moved like every other servant was trained to move, silent, invisible. Except Xiaohui never let me be invisible. Her eyes found me almost instantly. "Oh," she said, in a tone dripping with mock surprise. "You again?" I kept my gaze on the floor. "Tea, miss?" She didn't answer. Instead, she shifted in her seat, turning toward the others. "You know," she said idly, twirling the jade ring on her finger, "I've always believed that a house reflects the people who serve it.
She sipped her wine, then glanced at me loud enough for everyone to hear. Lately, the Liu mansion feels smudged. One of the elder aunts gave a polite chuckle. I said nothing. I placed the teacup on the carved table, then bowed again, ready to leave. But Xiao Hui wasn't finished. Tell me, she said, tapping a finger against her glass, do they teach you obedience at all, or is that just something higher class households care about? My spine stiffened. Still, I kept my head down. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I had learned by now that answering only fed her more. But then, she crossed the line. Do you know what I dislike most about servants? She said softly, like she was sharing a secret. They forget their place, especially the ones who start thinking they're pretty. The room went still. The fire popped in the hearth. I stared at the tray in my hands, fingers trembling slightly. My ears burned, my throat closed, but my body stayed still. I opened my mouth just slightly to say something, to walk the line between defiance and dignity. Just one word to remind her I was human. But before I could speak, his voice cut through the air like lightning. Then you should learn to respect them. Lu Shichen. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look at me. He didn't even shift his posture. But the way he said it, calm, flat, final, made the room feel colder than the storm outside. The silence that followed was louder than thunder. Xiao Hui blinked, lips parting in disbelief. Her smile faltered just slightly. Her hand tightened around her wine glass. Shichen, I wasn't talking about her specifically. Weren't you? He asked, still not looking at me. Still not looking at her either. Just staring straight ahead as if he was discussing the weather. But his voice held steel. I find it curious, he added, taking a slow sip of his wine, that someone so obsessed with class and elegance speaks with such a lack of both. A pause. Then he glanced, ever so briefly, at the teacup I had just placed near him. Thank you, he said. Not to her, not to the room. To me. Quiet, measured, just enough. And yet everything in me stilled. He could have yelled. He could have scolded Xiao Hui. He could have made a scene. But he didn't. Because Lu Shichen never moved directly. He didn't shield you with his body. He shielded you with his words, with silence that changed shape, with coldness that protected. Xiao Hui shifted in her chair. It was just a joke. Then perhaps you should learn to tell better ones, he said coolly. The fire flickered. The room fell back into uncomfortable silence, and I bowed quickly, heart hammering, before slipping out the door. I didn't look back, but for the rest of the night I felt the echo of his voice in my chest. He hadn't touched me. He hadn't smiled at me. He hadn't even looked me in the eye for more than a second. But he had stood between me and the flames, without ever leaving his seat. Later that night, the storm still raged, but inside the servants' quarters, all was quiet. I had just finished folding the linens, my feet ached, my hands were numb. The tea tray incident kept playing in my mind like a film reel stuck on loop. His voice, her eyes, the silence that came after. I told myself to let it go, to rest. I lit the lantern outside my room and turned the brass doorknob, already loosening the tie around my waist, when I heard heels clicking against the marble behind me. I didn't have to turn to know who it was. Leaving already? came that smooth, mocking voice. How efficient. I slowly straightened, hand still on the doorknob. A cold rush crept up my spine. I turned halfway, just enough to face her, but not enough to bow. Xiaohui stood there, her arms crossed, her smile carved from frost. She looked nothing like the demure heiress from earlier. The version before the elders was all silk and poise, but this version of her looked like a dagger in red lipstick. "Miss Lin," I said calmly. She stepped closer. "So," she said softly, almost with wonder, "this is what it takes to make him speak." I blinked. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Oh, come on," she hissed, dropping the pretense. "Don't be dumb. It's pathetic." Her heels clicked as she circled me slowly, eyes narrowing like a predator. "You think just because you serve tea with trembling hands and keep your head low, you're innocent? You think he doesn't notice the way you linger near his door, hoping for a glance, a crumb, a little attention?" "I'm just doing my job," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Right," she sneered, "and I'm the Empress of China." She stopped in front of me again, her face inches from mine. "Let me be clear," she said, voice turning sharp. "You are nothing. A stray, picked from some dusty alley by this family to clean floors. Don't get confused. Just because a man like Lu Shichen looks in your direction doesn't mean he sees you." Her words hit like slaps. I clenched my hands at my sides, nails digging into my palms. She leaned in closer, her breath scented with roses and poison. "You think he'll fight for you?" she said darkly. "He won't. Men like him don't marry maids. They use them. And when he's done, he'll discard you like a broken ornament." I didn't move. I didn't cry. But my throat burned like I'd swallowed fire. "Don't flatter yourself, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're not his rebellion. You're his charity case." Then she turned on her heel and walked away, her heels echoing like war drums in the empty corridor. I stood there for a long moment, the lantern's light flickering behind me. I didn't go after her. I didn't scream. But I just stood still, willing my knees not to shake, because that was how you survived in the Lu Mansion.
You didn't win by yelling. You didn't fight fire with fire. You just held your ground long enough for the wind to shift. But as I finally stepped into my room and shut the door behind me, one thought pulsed in my mind like thunder. She wasn't wrong about everything. I was nothing to everyone but one man. And I didn't know if that made me safe or even more in danger. The day I tried to run. The morning mist clung to the stone path as I zipped up my old duffel bag with trembling fingers. No tears, no regrets, just folded uniforms, a crumpled resignation letter left with the butler, and the bitter taste of humiliation on my tongue. The hallway outside my servants' quarters was quiet, too quiet, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. My shoes barely made a sound as I walked through the garden path, ducking beneath stone archways and past trimmed hedges, heading straight for the wrought iron gates at the far edge of the estate. The air was sharp with dew and the scent of damp earth, the kind that soaked into your bones and made you feel small. I could see the gate now, just a few more steps and I'd be free. But I stopped walking, because he was already there. Lu Shichen. Coming back from a morning meeting, dark coat draped over one shoulder, shirt cuffs undone like the storm hadn't touched him. He wasn't looking for me. He didn't need to. His eyes landed on the bag slung over my shoulder like a scar, and something unreadable flickered in his gaze. He didn't slow his steps. He didn't raise his voice. He stopped directly in front of me, tall, sharp, unmovable.
For a second, the wind moved, but he didn't. Then, with that cold voice that made decisions sound like law, he said, "Back." That was it. One word. No discussion, no room to argue, no trace of feeling. My throat tightened, but I said nothing. He didn't wait for a response. He stepped past me, like the matter was already settled, and disappeared into the corridor without looking back. And I stood there, bag heavy on my shoulder, surrounded by silence, with the wide-open gate yawning before me like a dare. But I didn't walk through it, because when Lu Shichen said back, there was no second option. The day jealousy turned to violence. The moment passed too quickly. One word, back, one glance from him, and then he was gone, his coat catching the wind like the tail of a passing storm. I stood there, frozen in front of the gates. My bag slipped off my shoulder with a quiet thud, and I didn't move. But someone else had seen. A figure stepped from the hedge-lined path, heels tapping like war drums against the stone. Lin Xiaohe. Hair flawless, dress perfect, fury carved into her face like porcelain shattered and barely glued together. I didn't even have time to breathe. "You think I didn't see that?" she hissed. Before I could answer, her hand shot forward, fingers tangled in my hair, yanking my head back so hard stars sparked in my vision. "I saw the way he looked at you, you filthy little roach," I gasped, stumbling as she dragged me behind the side pavilion, far from the main hall, far from the eyes of the household. "You think you're special because he stopped you? You think you're anything but dust under my shoes?" She shoved me hard against the stone wall. My shoulder slammed into it with a dull thud. I didn't scream. I wouldn't. "You really think he'll ever choose you over me, Lin Xiaohe?" Her voice cracked at the edges, unraveling from grace into something rabid. "Do you know who I am? I am the one his family arranged for him. I am the one who belongs here." She slapped me. My face snapped to the side, pain blooming hot across my cheek. I tasted blood, but I still didn't cry. Not even when she raised her hand again. Maybe if I ruin that pretty face, he'll remember where he belongs. But the second blow never landed. A voice, low, sharp, and lethal, cut through the air like a blade. "Let her go." We both froze. Xiaohe's hand hovered midair. My breath caught, and there he was. Lu Shichen. His eyes weren't cold now. They were wildfire, quiet, controlled, but burning. The kind of anger that didn't need volume, the kind that erased. Xiaohe dropped her hand slowly. "Shichen, he said, I said, let her go," stepping forward. She released me like I was poison. I stumbled back against the wall, holding on to the edge of the stone to keep myself upright. He didn't look at me. Not once. His eyes were locked on Xiaohe, like a king passing judgment on a traitor. "This wedding is over." Xiaohe flinched. "What?" "I will not marry a woman who raises her hand to my people." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "She's not your people," Xiaohe snapped, voice cracking into disbelief. "Exactly." Xiaohe stood frozen, chest rising and falling in panic as her world began to splinter. "Shichen, don't do this. Don't throw everything away for—" He turned to walk away. "Someone like her," she finished bitterly, her voice small. But he didn't respond. Didn't look back. Didn't even glance at me. Just walked past us both with silence sharper than any words. And in that silence, everything shattered. The gate stayed closed, and so did his heart. But for the first time, he had chosen. The chandelier above didn't flicker, but the tension in the Liu family's main salon crackled like lightning under silk. The room had been cleared of servants. Even the head butler stood behind the carved oak doors, dismissed with a nod from Madame Liu herself. Only the family remained. Lu Xichen stood by the window, framed by the gold-draped curtains and washed in a harsh afternoon light that slanted across his cheekbones, casting one side of his face in shadow. His charcoal gray coat was still buttoned from the meeting he came from. His cufflinks, plain, silver, understated, gleamed each time he flexed his hand. Across from him sat Chairman Lu, his father, aged, sharp-eyed, a man who had built empires with silence and broken rivals with a single tilt of his head. His cane rested across his knees, his hands folded over it. He hadn't spoken yet, but the weight of his gaze bore down like stone. Madame Lu, elegant and quiet, sat stiffly beside him, pearls resting like judgment around her neck. And to the side, standing with rigid posture and barely concealed outrage, stood Lin Shaohe, heir to a cosmetics empire, family friend, and the woman Xichen was never supposed to reject. "I've called off the wedding," he said quietly. He might as well have thrown a grenade of the velvet carpet. Xiaohe's perfectly shaped mouth parted. "What?" Chairman Lu raised his hand, silencing her. His voice, when it came, was calm but cold. "Explain." Xichen straightened. "I never agreed to this match. Not in my heart. I only played along for you, for the company, for the sake of maintaining the image." "You said nothing when we proposed the engagement," his father said evenly. "Because I knew what you'd say if I refused. I've spent the last 10 years obeying everything you asked. I took over Lu Group at 22. I've tripled your profits, cleaned your scandals. I gave you everything." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I turned myself into the son you wanted." He glanced toward Xiaohe, then away, as if she was just another task he'd completed. "But marrying someone out of obligation, I draw the line there." Xiaohe stepped forward, red in the face. "Is this about her, that low-class maid? Do you know what people will say about you?" "This isn't about her," Xichen said, voice sharper now. "This is about me." A pause. Then the older man finally stood. Chairman Lu walked slowly across the room, the tip of his cane tapping against the floor with steady finality. He stopped in front of his son and looked him straight in the eye.
"Do you think legacy is something you get to choose?" he asked. "No," Xichen replied quietly, "but I think freedom is." Silence. Something flickered in the old man's eyes, a shadow of disappointment, cold and sharp, but beneath it, something else, something older, worn. "You sound just like your mother," Chairman Lu murmured. Xichen's jaw clenched. Chairman Lu sighed, the sound older than his voice. "All these years I thought I was shaping you into something strong enough to carry the Lu name." "You were," Xichen said, "but now I want to be strong enough to carry my own." The old man said nothing. Then with a slow nod that felt like a gesture carved from pride and regret, he stepped back. "I don't agree with your choice, but I respect that you made one." Madame Lu closed her eyes, turning her face slightly away. Xiaohui stared in disbelief. "You're going to let him just walk away from this marriage? From the deal, our fathers?" "The deal was made between two men, and one of them has chosen to step away." "But this conversation is over, Miss Lin," he said flatly. Xiaohui paled. Xichen offered her one last glance, cold, formal, empty of any apology, and walked out of the room. He didn't slam the door. He didn't need to, because for the first time in his life, Lu Xichen had made a choice that didn't belong to the Lu dynasty. It belonged to him. The storage room was filled with dust and silence. I rolled up my sleeves and tied my hair into a loose knot, trying not to think too much about why the head maid had suddenly told me to clean this place alone. She shoved a mop into my hands like it was urgent, like it had to be me. I didn't argue. I never did. Not when I was sent into forgotten corners of this house, not when people avoided my eyes like I was a crack on the marble floor. But something about the air in here felt too familiar. The scent of old wood, lemon polish, and something else lingered, something like cologne and cold winter. My hand reached up to wipe the upper shelf. I was still stretching when a voice sliced through the air like a blade dipped in ice. "Still not very graceful, are you?" My chest tightened. I froze with my arm halfway extended. My breath hitched. That voice. I turned slowly. Si Chen was standing at the door, his face unreadable, the light behind him, looking like a shadow pulled straight from a fever dream. Calm, cold, utterly in control. "You sent me here?" I asked, trying not to let my voice shake. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him with a soft click. "I don't clean, but I knew you'd come if someone told you to." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. My fingers curled tighter around the rag in my hand. "If you're here to remind me of my place, don't bother. Everyone else already did." He didn't move. He didn't blink. I called off the wedding. My heart stuttered. I turned to face him fully. "You what?" "I told my family I'm not marrying Lin Xiaohui." I stared at him like I'd misheard, like the storm I'd been living in had finally split open the sky in a way I wasn't ready for. "Why are you telling me that?" I asked carefully. He stepped closer, still not touching me, but his presence wrapped around me like a noose of heat and command. "You said, I don't belong in your world," he said. "But you're wrong." I looked down. "I didn't mean, I don't care what you meant," he cut in. "You're still here, cleaning, pretending none of this matters." "It doesn't," I lied. I looked away when I said it. His voice dropped lower. "You matter. More than you think." My breath caught. He didn't say it gently. He didn't reach out or try to soften the weight of his words. They dropped like anchors. "You matter enough that someone tried to drag you by the hair just for existing in my world." I swallowed hard. "I didn't ask for any of this." "No," he said, stepping closer. "You never ask. You just take it. You let them belittle you, hurt you, humiliate you." I bit the inside of my cheek. "Because it's easier than fighting." He suddenly leaned in, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel the weight of his breath. "Stop running." "I'm not." "You are. You're trying to leave. Again." I opened my mouth to argue, but my words scattered before they could form. His hand landed beside my head, pressed flat against the shelf behind me, not touching, but caging me in. "You're not going anywhere," he said. I could barely breathe. "You can't keep me here," I whispered. "I already have." I stared up at him. "You think you can control everything." "I don't think," he replied, voice low. "I know." I could feel my pulse hammering. My whole body wanted to rebel, wanted to shout, to run, to say I hated him for this. But I didn't. Because deep down, I wanted him to say it. Even if it came out cruel, even if it came out cold, even if it wasn't love, not yet. "You don't make things easy, do you?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He stepped away, his eyes still locked on mine as he opened the door and disappeared into the hallway, leaving me in the storage room, breathless and trembling, with no escape left but him. The study doors were never meant for people like me. When the servant said, "The master wants to see you in the study," I almost dropped the silver tray I was holding. Lu Shichen's study was off limits to most of the staff, a sanctum of silence and shadows. I'd only seen glimpses through half-open doors, books that looked untouched, a fireplace that never lit, and windows taller than my entire room. So when I stepped inside, my feet felt too loud. He stood by the window, back to me, dressed in a crisp black shirt that matched the mood of the room.
Outside, the late afternoon sky bled into gray and thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. "You called for me?" I said, trying to sound unaffected. "Come here," he said, without turning around. His voice made my skin jump. I walked forward, careful not to leave any emotion in my steps, careful not to feel too much, because I already did. "I've had enough of this," he said, finally facing me. His expression was unreadable, but his jaw was tense. I blinked. "Enough of what?" "This." He gestured vaguely between us. "The hiding, the silence, the pretending I don't feel what I feel every time I see you." My lips parted slightly, stunned. "What are you saying?" He walked toward me slowly, like a storm deciding whether or not to destroy the village. "I don't want you anywhere else but here," he said. "Not in another house, not in another city, not in anyone else's life." I looked up at him, throat dry. "Why?" His eyes burned into me. "Because I'm in love with you." The air left my lungs. He said it like a threat, like a confession he'd chained to his chest for too long, and now that it was free, it could burn the whole mansion down. "You don't say things like that," I whispered. "Not to girls like me." "I don't care who you are," he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping. "You make this place feel alive. You make me feel alive." My back hit the edge of his desk. His hand lifted, not to touch, but to hover, as if he were still giving me one last chance to run. I didn't. His lips crashed against mine with no warning, no gentleness, just fire. Years of silence, walls collapsing. I kissed him back with everything I didn't know I was carrying. I wasn't the servant anymore, and he wasn't the master. For that moment, we were just two people on fire. When we pulled apart, barely breathing, I didn't know what to say. My heart thudded against my ribs like it was trying to answer for me. Lucia Chen leaned close again, his lips brushing my ear as he whispered, "You're not leaving. Not now. Not ever." My heart was still racing from the kiss. My lips still tingled like they remembered something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. He stood close, too close, his breath warm, his expression unreadable, his entire presence folding around me like a net I couldn't escape. Or maybe didn't want to. But I had to say something. I can't be part of your world," I said, softly, still trembling. "I don't belong in it." His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "You think I care about that?" "You should," I said, stepping back. "Because I do. You're the heir to an empire. You sit in boardrooms and wear suits that cost more than my entire life. I clean chandeliers. You make this place breathe." I froze. He stepped forward again, this time not as the CEO, not as the master of the house, just as Lu Shichen, the man who had been watching me quietly, burning slowly. "I wake up and I look for your voice. I hear it in the hallway before I even open my eyes. I wait for your footsteps. You make this house less dead." My throat tightened. "But people will come for me. Your family already hates me. Xiaohui. I'll burn down the whole earth if anyone ever hurts you again." The way he said it, cold, calm, certain, it was a promise made of steel. I looked at him, eyes wide. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying, and I know you feel it too." Tears threatened, but I blinked them back. "I do." He didn't move. I stepped closer, my voice shaking. "I've tried not to. I told myself I was imagining things, that someone like you could never look at someone like me and see more than a servant." "I don't see a servant," he said. "I see a woman who challenges me, who makes me think, who makes this ice palace melt just by existing in it." My hands reached for his shirt, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't help it. "I'm scared." He took my hand and placed it over his heart. "So am I," he said. "But I'd rather walk into the fire with you than live in the cold without you." I didn't reply. Instead, I kissed him. Soft this time. Deep. Real. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of falling, because I had fallen. And somehow, he caught me.